It comes as a surprise to absolutely nobody that I was a Nintendo kid growing up. My first console was a Wii, and I ended up sticking with Nintendo for a while. I didn't end up getting an Xbox 360 until 2014, after the Xbox One came out, so I ended up missing out on a lot of the other console's exclusive games. Chief among them was the Halo series. I didn't play any of the Halo games until just this year when on a whim I bought the Master Chief Collection on Steam. And play it I did. I had no idea what I was missing out on. I can now say with absolute confidence that I am a Halo fan now. I have spent the last 6 or so months consuming as much Halo media as I can, and it's bordering on an obsession. Catch me browsing Halopedia in class when I should be paying attention and spending hours every night watching lore videos on YouTube. But what about these games made me fall in love with them in the first place? What makes them stand out against the absolute oversaturation of the FPS genre? Why do I love replaying them again and again when I have way too many games in my Steam library I haven't even played? Why is Cortana so fucking hot? Well, that's what we are here to discuss. Maybe not so much that last one. Let's jump right into it.
Once again, it is our job to finish what the Fly Boys started. We are leaving this ship platoon and engaging the Covenant on solid ground. When we meet the enemy, we will rip their skulls from their spines and toss them away laughing. Am I right, Marines? Sir, yes, sir! Damn right I am.
Combat Evolved starts simple enough for a sci-fi shooter. You're a big green man on a spaceship and there are aliens. Grab a gun and your robot girlfriend and get the fuck out of there and kick some alien ass along the way. Out of the gate, the game isn't too heavy on the exposition front. What you're told is that you are on the UNSC Pillar of Autumn, a ship fleeing the planet Reach, which was just destroyed by the Covenant, an alien empire waging a decades-long genocidal campaign against humanity. You are Master Chief Petty Officer John 117, a genetically and cybernetically enhanced super soldier known as a Spartan. The pinnacle of humanity's technological achievements, a towering hulk of a man in power armor. While the first level leaves a good first impression, doing a good job of familiarizing the player with the gameplay mechanics, the second level, Halo, is what really made me go from, this game's pretty cool, to holy fuck. After you abandon the Pillar of Autumn, your escape pod crash lands on a mysterious ring world, the titular Halo. Master Chief is the sole survivor of the crash, and as you step out of the pod and get a good look around at the surface of Halo for the first time, you come to realize you are entirely alone on this alien world. Aside from some Earth-like vegetation, Halo is completely deserted. You can see the curve of the ring arc all the way into the sky, something that must have been really technically impressive on the original Xbox. This ring world is in no way natural. Something must have put it here for a specific purpose, but you, the player, know just as much about Halo as the characters in the game, which isn't much at all. It's quiet. You know that it won't be long before the Covenant come looking for you, but now, it's just you. With Cortana's guidance and your trusty assault rifle in hand, you head into the hills in search of any other survivors from the Autumn. This level does a perfect job of capturing what Halo is all about. Big epic firefights against hordes upon hordes of cubby bastards, big open areas with vehicle combat, and delves into these ominous, ancient, artificial tunnels beneath the surface. Also, in this level, you get to fight alongside the Sergeant Major Avery Johnson, the best character in the series. This level alone convinced me that this game is one of the greatest of all time. Even 20 years later, Combat Evolved still holds up incredibly well, and I am saying that without any kind of pre-existing nostalgia for the game. Remember, I did not exist when Halo came out. Yeah, the graphics are a little bit dated. It's obvious the game came out in 2001, but the core gameplay has aged incredibly well, better than lots of other games of its era. Speaking of gameplay, what would a shooter be without gunplay? And Halo's gunplay is so satisfying to master. It is an absolute blast running into hordes of enemies and committing mass alien murder. I don't know if I've ever played another shooter that has gunplay as satisfying as Halo. Each weapon has a unique purpose that allows you to play however you want. You got the assault rifle, which is good for medium range combat and suppressing fire. The shotgun is excellent for short range combat and is incredibly useful when fighting in tight spaces. The sniper rifle lets you use stealth to dispatch enemies from far away before they even get the chance to see you. The plasma rifle and plasma pistol are able to easily take down an elite or jackal's shields, leaving them vulnerable to your other weapons. And lastly, the Magnum pistol is just straight up broken. It does so much damage and has a scope for some reason. It can kill hunters with a single shot. It is ridiculous and I love it. And it's not just all about the guns. Master Chief has a lot of options when it comes to dispatching those cubby bastards. Do you run in with your assault rifle and spray bullets everywhere? Do you pick off the grunts and jackals from a distance with your pistol? Do you toss a grenade and try to take out a bunch of them at once? Do you sneak up behind the elite and try to take them out with a one-hit melee assassination kill? All of the enemies have a unique role to play in each encounter. Elites are supposed to be your equals. They're more powerful and come equipped with energy shields. More often than not, they're leading groups of grunts and jackals, and if you kill the elite first, it causes all of the grunts and jackals to panic and makes them easier to deal with. Jackals wield large circular shields that make them a sort of defensive unit, but you can easily dispatch them with a frag grenade or by shooting them in the hand to stagger them. Runts are the standard cannon fodder, easy to kill and not much of a threat. Hunters are big armored mini-bosses, armed with lasers and are capable of dealing massive damage with a melee attack, but they are really slow and easy to outmaneuver and are vulnerable to attacks on their exposed backs and necks. Halo also has a regenerating energy shield mechanic that gives you a lot more flexibility when it comes to combat situations. Chief shields allow him to take a good amount of damage before he actually starts losing health. So, if you wanted, you could charge right into the middle of a fight and get up close and personal with the enemies. It allows you to play much more aggressively than you would be able to without it. Before Halo, most people really didn't make first-person shooters for consoles, and for the few FPS games that did come out on console, it was the Wild West. I mean, imagine controlling an FPS with this 3-pronged alien penis of a controller with one analog stick, aiming and strafing with the C buttons? What the fuck? Rare, were you on acid when you designed this game? Halo was the first game that introduced the control scheme that every console peasant takes for granted today. Moving with the left stick and looking and aiming with the right stick. It was revolutionary and is still the standard for console shooters to this day. Honestly, it's a miracle that Halo came out as good as it was. Bungie wasn't doing too hot during Halo's development. Their previous game, Myth 2, had a disastrous launch. The game shipped with a bug that would even make Bethesda reach for the smelling salts. If you tried to uninstall the game, it would also delete every single file on your computer. Oops. Wonder how many school assignments Bungie deleted with that blunder. Imagine explaining to your professor that Myth 2 deleted your final project. As a result, Bungie had to recall the game, which cost the company around $800,000. Around the same time, Halo was entering development, but in the beginning, it was nothing like the Halo we know and love today. Originally, Halo was an RTS called Blam. And why was it called Blam? Because Bungie's co-founder was ashamed to tell his mom that he was working on a game called Monkey Nuts. That is not a joke. That was its original title. Imagine a world where Microsoft's brand new Xbox console launched with a game called Monkey Nuts. Now that would have moved units. Eventually, the people at Bungie decided it was more fun to actually control the vehicles and characters yourself, so they transitioned the game to a third-person shooter. This was the version of the game presented on stage by Steve Jobs at Macworld in 1999. Even as late as E3 2000, Halo was still a third-person shooter. After the Myth 2 disaster, things were looking bleak. Bungie was just barely hanging on with the sales of the first Myth game, but with the recall of Myth 2, they were just bleeding money. Out of desperation, Bungie sold the franchise rights to Myth and Oni to Take-Two Interactive, but that wasn't enough. In comes Microsoft. The development of the Xbox was well underway, and it needed games to bolster its launch lineup. Bungie, still in an absolutely desperate state, approached Ed Fries, the head of Microsoft Game Studios, about an acquisition. Microsoft would take control of Bungie and Halo would become a launch game for the Xbox. With this acquisition, Bungie had a Herculean task ahead of them. They had just over a year to turn this messy, prototypical third-person shooter game into a product that they could actually ship as a tentpole release from Microsoft's new unproven console. This was the game Microsoft was banking on to move units and sell the public on the Xbox. No pressure. Sure, Microsoft is one of the biggest corporations on the entire earth, making billions of dollars every single year. But the console market has proven itself notoriously hard to break into. The Apple Pippin, the 3DO, and the CDI, and many others all failed. There was no guarantee that the Xbox would have any sort of staying power in the console market. It could have easily flopped and gone down as one of Microsoft's greatest failures, right there with Microsoft Bob, Windows ME, the Zune, and Windows Phone. In order to better connect the player with the action, they switched the game to a first-person perspective. Microsoft canceled every other project Bungie was working on so everybody could work on Halo. Open world, fuck that. Cut that out, we don't need it. Campaign too long, cut it down to 40% of its original length. Let's recycle a fuck ton of level geometry while we're at it. Fuck, now the plot doesn't make sense. We gotta rewrite the script just 1 week before the voiceover is gonna be recorded. Multiplayer, it's not fun. Let's scrap it and rebuild it all from scratch only 4 months before the game ships. Most game studios under that kind of pressure would just shit out some half-finished, broken mess of a game. Something only an absolute psychopath or naive kid would even find remotely playable. But despite all the odds, Bungie made something that was truly amazing. Sure, there are some aspects of Combat Evolved that are obviously a result of the horrifically rushed development. There are some areas where the exact same level design and geometry is used over and over and over again. This especially rears its head during the latter half of the game. A level like 2 Betrayals is more or less a retread of Assault on the Control Room. I don't mean to be racist, but everything looks the same! I do not understand the people who think that Combat Evolved has better level design than Halo 2. It just doesn't. Some levels I wander around aimlessly because I have no fucking idea where to go. I end up backtracking to places I've already been and getting frustrated. And with the hasty script rewrites in order to make the plot of the severely truncated campaign actually make sense, There could be some rather clunky expository dialogue in some of the cutscenes, such as when you rescue Captain Keyes in Truth and Reconciliation and he just drops this big important revelation about Halo being a weapon out of nowhere.
While the Covenant had us locked up in here, I overheard the guards talking about this ring world. They call it Halo.
One moment, sir. Accessing the Covenant BattleNet. According to the data in their networks, the ring has some kind of deep religious significance.
It definitely seems like they originally intended for this discovery about the true nature of Halo to be a lot more natural, but this is what they had to do in order to keep the story going at a decent pace. But as much as these things bother me, the core gameplay is so fun, so satisfying, and so engaging that most of the time I'm more than willing to look past the game's flaws. That is, except for one level, and if you've played this game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The library. The fucking library. This level is way too long, way too slow paced, everything looks the same, and need I mention the goddamn motherfucking rocket launcher flood. What the actual fuck is this goddamn bullshit? Who was the genius that decided, you know what would be fair and balanced and not at all infuriating? If we gave the flood rocket launchers, and they made it so they shoot at you with surgical fucking precision. Bungie, did your level designer come to work one day high off his ass on methamphetamine and decided it would be funny to do this shit? You know, the kids who decide to make impossible bullshit Mario Maker courses are the same kids that grow up to do shit like this. I think maybe it would do me some good though to save some of this anger for Halo 2's legendary difficulty. The footage I'm showing in the library is the only gameplay footage in this video I did not capture myself. I just could not bring myself to play through that level again. Fuck the library. After that intense complaining, let's talk about my favorite level in Combat Evolved to lighten the mood. The Silent Cartographer is Combat Evolved at its absolute best. It starts with Chief and the Marines landing on an island and fighting their way up the beaches looking for a map room that'll allow them to find Halo's control room. It has the perfect balance of encounters in big, wide open spaces, vehicular combat, and delves on foot into sprawling dungeons deep underground. This level showcases Combat Evolved's freedom of gameplay better than any other level in the game, how it allows you to take a number of different approaches to each objective and combat encounter. There is no one right way to play the game. If you wanted at the beginning of the stage, instead of charging up the beach with the rest of the squad, you could turn around, go around the back of the island, and deactivate the security door to the map room before you even arrive at the map room for the first time and skip a huge chunk of the level. Developers at Bungie said that this level was inspired by the natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest after the studio moved to Seattle following their acquisition by Microsoft. One thing that plays a huge role in making Combat Evolved's campaign stand out is the atmosphere. And that was accomplished through both the amazing soundtrack by Marty O'Donnell and the immersive environmental storytelling present throughout all 10 of Halo's main campaign missions. This wouldn't be a video about Halo if I didn't take a second to praise Marty's excellent compositions and incredible sound design. Marty, in my eyes, is one of the greatest of all time, up there with some of the all-time legends like Koji Kondo or Grant Kirkhope. His soundtrack goes a long way to making the game as impactful as it is, from capturing the wonder of stepping out in a Halo for the first time, to playing out the ferocity and might of the Covenant, emphasizing the absolute horror of the flood, or just making you feel like an absolute badass. Halo was one of the first games to have music that adapts to the things that the player is doing, something that has since become standard for video game music. Halo even dips its toes into the realms of horror. The level 343 Guilty Spark serves as an introduction for the Flood, a terrifying alien parasite that has no drives or desires other than to consume all living things in the galaxy. Humans, Covenant, whatever, it doesn't matter. It eats it all. The level begins with Chief arriving in a dark, foggy swamp. Covenant forces running away in fear from something. These guys are supposed to be unstoppable. Countless human colony worlds have fallen under their might. What could the Covenant possibly be scared of? As you wander into this dark, abandoned Forerunner facility in search of Captain Keyes, you can see the dead bodies of both humans and Covenant strewn all over the floor and the bright blue blood of elites splattered all over the walls. It's quiet, abandoned. Curiously, there are no actual elites here. Typically, you never find the grunts and jackals without an elite leading them. What killed them? Where did they go? I didn't do that. Why is this guy shooting at me? I'm the Master Chief.
Stay back! You're not turning me into one of those things! I'll blow your brains out! Get away from me!
Oh god. What is that? Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. I gotta get out of here. This is why there were no elites in the level. They all became Flood. After fighting off that wave of Flood, you rush back to the elevator you came in on. But instead of taking you back up towards the surface, it brings you down deeper into the facility. Oh no, where are we going? Eventually, John does make it back to the surface and encounters the monitor of the Halo installation, an AI named 343 Guilty Spark, who tells him that the only way to stop the flood outbreak is now to activate the Halo. Together, Spark and the Chief head to the library, retrieve the activation index for the Halo, and return to the control room to fire the ring, only for Cortana to tell John that the way that the Halo ring contains the flood is by killing all life in the galaxy in order to starve them of living material to consume and assimilate. But why does Spark need Chief to activate the ring? Well, humanity was chosen by the Forerunners to be their successor species, the Reclaimers, who would one day inherit the mantle of responsibility for all life in the galaxy. Only they, the Reclaimers, can activate Forerunner technology, including the Halos. Now, knowing this, Chief and Cortana decide the best way to stop Spark from activating Halo is to go the tried and true route of blowing it the fuck up. They figured that blowing up the fusion reactor on the wreck of the Pillar of Autumn was the best way to go about that. On the Autumn, the Chief successfully destabilizes the ship's fusion reactor, maybe a little too successfully because the reactor was exploding too fast. Go! 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 The Warthog run at the end of Combat Evolved was an incredible way to sign off an incredible game. When I saw the countdown timer appear on the waypoint marker that said my destination was 2 kilometers away, shit! My heart was pounding, my palms were sweating. Hordes of Flood, Covenant, and Sentinels getting in their way to try and stop you. It was incredible. I feel like in the modern age, first-person shooters have kind of reached a point of stagnation and oversaturation. Activision, Blizzard, and EA pump out what feels like the same game every year for $60 with the same gritty modern war aesthetic. And for some reason, people eat that shit up. And because of that, everybody tries to copy them, and it causes the entire genre to feel uninspired, bland, samey, and just in general, lacks soul and personality. And that's why when FPS games innovate and establish their own identity, they're lauded as masterpieces of game design and showered with high praise from critics and gamers everywhere. Think of the new Doom games, Team Fortress 2, Half-Life, Bioshock. They all dare to break the mold and establish their own identities and set them apart from the rest of the genre, while all the Call of Duties and Battlefields fade away into the background noise. Every annual release more or less the same as the last. That's why even 20 years after it released on the original Xbox, Halo Combat Evolved still feels like a breath of fresh air in an increasingly stale genre. Combat Evolved is still an incredible game. Yeah, the graphics are a tad rough, and the level design can be a bit subpar at times. And I don't really see a reason to come back to the multiplayer over Halo 2, 3, and Reach, but Combat Evolved is still such a fun game. Halo Combat Evolved was a revolution in video games. It kickstarted a multi-billion-dollar multimedia franchise, redefined the console first-person shooter, and it put Microsoft and the Xbox on the map as a serious contender in the gaming market, able to stand toe-to-toe with Nintendo and Sony. Halo's success also demonstrated there was a market for first-person shooter games on consoles. You hear that, all you console peasants who buy each annual release of COD and Battlefield at launch? You owe everything to Halo. While at launch, it wasn't a runaway success. In the longer term, it ultimately ended up having an incredibly high attach rate with the console. During the first 2 months after it launched, it sold alongside over 50% of Xbox consoles. This was the game people bought Xboxes for. Halo was a big deal, and a follow-up was only logical. In the words of the Master Chief,
No, I think we're just getting started.
Bungie never planned for Halo to become a trilogy, but after the enormous success of Combat Evolved, a sequel was inevitable. For Halo 2, Bungie wanted to make a game that was bigger and more ambitious than Combat Evolved, innovating on what the first game did right, fixing what it did wrong, and bringing back ideas that were intended for Combat Evolved that were scrapped. It was 2004. George W. Bush was elected to a second term as president, Mount St. Helens was back on his bullshit, and I was but a wee baby, and Halo 2 was released. You cannot talk about Halo 2 without bringing up its most important innovation, online play via Xbox Live. Finally, you can have kids fresh out of the womb scream racial slurs in your ear, or have grown-ass men melting down like a toddler and having a temper tantrum over a video game.
Fuck you, I will kill you, fucking piece of fucking shit, you fucking retard. Fuck off, dude. Thanks, guys. Thanks for stealing my fucking kills once again.
Fuck. God damn it, fuck you. Came to multiplayer in Combat Evolved, you had two options. Up to 4 people could play split screen on one Xbox, or up to 16 people could play together if everybody decided to bring their Xboxes and LAN cables to somebody's house and use System Link. But here's the problem, we are gamers and we don't have many friends, much less 15 other people all with Xboxes and LAN cables at the ready. Safe to say, most of the larger multiplayer maps in Combat Evolved went unplayed by most of the Halo community. Halo 2's online matchmaking revolutionized the way we play games. Just as how Combat Evolved was the killer app for the Xbox itself, Halo 2 was the killer app for Xbox Live. It helped bring online multiplayer into the mainstream for console gaming and kicked off the age of the modern esport. Without Halo 2, the gaming world in 2021 would be radically different. Console gamers owe everything to Halo. Everything. Halo 2's launch also brought with it another revolution in the way we see video games as a medium. The advent of the blockbuster game release. Leading up to release, the hype for Halo 2 was unlike anything the gaming world had ever seen. Halo 2 was the first video game to ever have its trailer shown in movie theaters. Microsoft wanted its launch to be a cultural phenomenon. Microsoft also made an alternate reality game called I Love Bees to promote the game, which became so popular it even diverted media attention away from the 2004 presidential election. Maybe Halo 2 is the real reason John Kerry lost. And it's safe to say it worked. In the first 24 hours after launch, Halo 2 sold 2.4 million copies and grossed $125 million. People lined up outside of stores all around the world for the midnight release. The game was selling like hotcakes. It was the single biggest launch for an entertainment product ever up to that point. But was the hype worth it? Yes. And no? Upon release, Halo 2 was met with universal critical acclaim. But the game was not without issues. Bungie's ambitions to follow up Combat Evolved left them realizing relatively late in development that they had bitten off way more than they could chew, and they had to make massive cuts to the game in order to ship it by the 2004 holiday season. They had no room to delay the game. The Xbox 360 was set to launch the following year, and they needed to send out the original Xbox with a bang. The crunch was real. People spent the night at the office to finish the game. The last third of the game was cut entirely, leaving a controversial cliffhanger ending that some people really liked and others hated. Almost everything that was shown at the game's E3 2003 demo was scrapped and reworked. The game itself at the time it was shown off was an absolute mess and hardly in a playable state. Weapons and vehicles like variants of the Warthog and an ATV which would eventually become Halo 3's Mongoose were scrapped. All of Bungie's other games were cancelled, and stop me if you've heard this one before. Yeah, just like Combat Evolved, Halo 2's development was characterized by a ridiculous crunch and massive cuts to the game's content. But despite that, in my eyes, the game that ended up coming out was still absolutely incredible. In my honest opinion, Halo 2's campaign is fucking badass, the best in the series. It improves on Combat Evolved in almost every aspect. The level design, the music, the gameplay, the graphics, the story. Halo 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. When it comes to new gameplay mechanics, the two big things Halo 2 ended up bringing to the table were dual wielding and vehicle hijacking. These two additions add a new dimension to combat and give the player so many new ways to go about combat encounters. Dual wielding allows you to trade the use of melee and grenades for pure, raw firepower, and it's fucking awesome. Look at the box, the homie has 2 guns. Count them, 1, 2, 2 guns! That is some badass action hero shit right there. Dual wielding encourages players to mix and match weapons to find the best combination to tackle certain challenges. You could be boring and just use 2 SMGs, or you could do something like an SMG and a plasma rifle, using the plasma rifle to take down an elite shield and then use the SMG to finish the job. Or you could use the Magnum in an SMG, using the SMG for suppression fire while doing the bulk of the damage with the pistol. Or you could use 2 needlers and absolutely obliterate any and all Covenant unfortunate enough to get in the way. There's a reason why they took away the ability to dual wield the needler in Halo 3. It was just too good. They say fear the pink mist for a reason. Vehicle hijacking gives players on foot more options with how they can deal with mounted enemies. Unless you had a rocket launcher or had a really well-timed grenade stick, it was hard for players on foot to gain the upper hand over a player in a vehicle. But now you can go up to a player in a vehicle, board it, and either pummel them and take the vehicle from them, or with some vehicles like the Scorpion and the Wraith, plant a grenade on them and make whoever was caught inside go BOOM! Apparently employees at Bungie saw footage of vehicle hijacking in Grand Theft Auto Vice City and they're like, bro, I want Master Chief to do that. Along with these new features, Halo 2 added lots of new weapons, giving players more options in how they choose to play the game. You remember those elites with energy swords on Combat Evolved? Now you can use those too! Same with the fuel rod cannon. Other additions to the weapon sandbox were the submachine gun, the battle rifle, the Covenant carbine, the beam rifle, and the brute shot grenade launcher, just to name a few. There was one unfortunate change to the weapon sandbox in Halo 2, however. They nerfed the Magnum. Bring back Halo 1 Magnum 343. Do it. Please. For me. Bonnie Ross, I'm begging you. There was one aspect of the gameplay, however, that was a notable step down from Combat Evolved. The absolute fucking bullshit that is this game's legendary difficulty. What the fuck, Bungie? Bullshit sniper jackals can kill you in one hit unless you memorize their exact location in every single level they appear in. You're going to be in for a miserable time. Sometimes the enemy placement is just outright unfair. On the level Gravemind, you can get killed before you can even see your crosshair appear on the screen. That is some Kaizo bullshit right there. Enemies also fire their weapons way too fast. An elite with a plasma rifle can kill you from full shield in like 2 seconds. And I'm not exaggerating for the sake of comedy. That is just how poorly balanced this difficulty is. It doesn't help that on Legendary difficulty, Master Chief, the pinnacle of human evolution, is the second weakest character in the entire game. The only thing he is stronger than is the Flood Infection forms. These little bastards. Did nobody playtest this before they shipped the game? Like the day before the game went gold, somebody at Bungie was like, oh shit, we forgot to put Legendary in the game. Let's just jack up the enemy's damage and fuck down, put some bullshit everywhere. That'll provide a fun challenge, right? Wrong! Halo 2 also gets rid of having a health bar, instead of leaning all the way into the regenerating energy shield mechanic, which I feel contributes to the absurd difficulty of Legendary. It wasn't balanced enough to properly compensate for the lack of a health bar on the higher difficulties. This energy shield only approach ended up sticking though, and it was carried over to all future Master Chief games, and for the most part, they were able to strike a better balance with it in Halo 3 and 4. The highlight of Halo 2's campaign though is absolutely the story. Halo 2 starts out by introducing a new character, the elite Fel Vadami, the commander of the Covenant fleet that engaged Master Chief in the UNSC in the first game. Vadami is standing trial before the Covenant's 3 hierarchs, the Prophets Truth, Regret, and Mercy, for allowing the Master Chief to destroy the Halo ring at the end of Combat Evolved. In the Covenant mythology, the Halo rings are sacred relics. Their activation would fulfill the central prophecy of the Covenant religion, the Great Journey, in which all who followed the Covenant would ascend to godhood. In this cutscene, we are also introduced to the Jiralhane, or Brutes, and their leader, Tartarus. The Brutes have had a bitter rivalry with the Elites ever since they were introduced to the Covenant, and Tartarus clearly enjoys watching Vadami being so publicly disgraced. Tartarus is an asshole. For allowing Halo to be destroyed, Fel Vadami is deemed a heretic, stripped of his command and branded with the mark of shame by Tartarus.
There wouldn't be any cameras.
And you told me you were gonna wear something nice.
Meanwhile, on Cairo Station, in orbit around the Earth, the Master Chief and Sergeant Johnson are awarded for their heroism during the Battle of Halo, and Captain Keyes' daughter, Miranda, is given her father's posthumous reward for his bravery and sacrifice on Halo. But the ceremony had to be cut short because the Covenant fleet had arrived in the vicinity of Earth. The battle for Earth has begun.
I need a weapon.
Right this way.
Already, what a way to make a first impression and expand the Halo universe. In the first game, the Covenant was nothing more than an army of evil aliens the Master Chief had to blast through, but in Halo 2 we are introduced to the Covenant leadership and get an inside look at how the Covenant society actually functions. Combined with the absolutely stunning remastered cutscenes in Halo 2 Anniversary, this game feels like it could be an epic sci-fi action movie. This was one of the first games to take a more cinematic movie-like approach to its storytelling, and it's really something special. Fel Vadami is spared from his death sentence for his heresy by the Prophets because they had a different fate in mind for him. Instead, the Prophets offer Vadami the opportunity to become the new Arbiter of the Covenant. Knowing that the Arbiter's mission is suicidal by intention, Vadami accepts anyway, hoping to regain some semblance of honor before his death.
What would you have your Arbiter do?
And holy crap, you get to play as the Arbiter! My mind was blown when I realized I got to play as the bad guys. This is awesome! The Arbiter plays more or less the same as the Master Chief, but instead of a flashlight you would never use when you press 4, you have an active camo that you'll never use instead. I know that when the game first came out, a lot of people felt like they were lied to by Halo 2's marketing, which mainly focused on the Master Chief and the defense of Earth. Only 3 levels in the entire campaign take place on or near Earth, and for half of the game you don't even get to play as the Chief. But I actually like the Arbiter. Playing as the Arbiter allows the player to learn more about the internal politics and power structures of the Covenant, allowing for more nuance and gray areas in the story, and letting the player relate to them in ways they weren't able to otherwise if the Arbiter wasn't there. Like, do you really think the Master Chief knows or cares about what's going on inside the Covenant? No. To him, they're just evil aliens he needs to blast through before they activate the Halo array and destroy humanity. Also, I really want his voice actors to read me bedtime stories in the Arbiter voice.
Kill me or release me, parasite. But do not waste my time with talk.
Something that Halo 2 experimented with was adding boss battles to Halo, and they are very hit and miss. The battles against the Heretic Leader and Regret in particular are laughably easy, and they're no more powerful than some regular enemies. After Halo 2, Bungie never really tried boss battles again in Halo, and that was the way it stayed until 343 thought, you know what would be a good idea? If we made players fight the Warden Eternal 5 fucking times in Halo 5. Fuck Halo 5, but this isn't about Halo 5. Let's not get ourselves sidetracked here. We're talking about a good Halo game right now. After discovering another Halo ring, Master Chief kills Regret while Arbiter is tasked with retrieving the Halo's activation index. And the mission where the Arbiter goes to retrieve the activation index is Quarantine Zone, perhaps the best stage in the game. It's got an epic three-way battle between humans, Covenant, and Flood, wide open vehicle sections, even the Flood use vehicles, and it's all backed with some kick-ass metal. Once again, Marty just kills it with the soundtrack, and the remastered soundtrack in Halo 2 Anniversary makes everything so much grander. It is definitely the definitive version of the tracks. It has a good mix of the classic Halo sound, some grander orchestral pieces that sound right out of a Hollywood blockbuster. And some heavy metal. Breaking Benjamin even let Marty use their song Blow Me Away in Halo 2 for free. I wish there was more metal in Halo games, because the metal tracks that are here are the highlight of the OST. I know it wasn't composed by Marty, but Halo 2 Anniversary replaces Blow Me Away with perhaps the single best song in any Halo OST, Breaking the Covenant. Ultimately, the Arbiter and his entire species are betrayed by Tartarus and the Prophets, and through an encounter with the Master Chief and the Gravemind, the central intelligence of the Flood.
Relax. I'd rather not piss this thing off.
Demon.
RB realizes the truth about the Covenant religion, how it was based on a lie. In order to stop Truth and Tartarus from activating Halo, Arbiter Chief and their respective species form an alliance that would turn the tide of the war in humanity's favor. Master Chief is sent to the Covenant's capital, High Charity, and chases down Truth and Mercy, who have the activation index.
Boo.
Kill the demon!
Truth entrusts Tartarus with the activation index, and he blasts off for Earth, but not before the Flood begin to infest High Charity and use it to escape containment on Halo. Mercy is overtaken by the Flood and left for dead by Truth. Chief stows away on Truth's ship, but not before leaving Cortana behind to blow up Halo like they did the last time, just in case things turn south. But ultimately, Cortana is captured by the Gravemind. Back on Halo, the Arbiter forms an unlikely alliance with Sergeant Johnson in order to stop Tartarus from firing the ring. Together, they fight their way to the control room, rescue Keys, and kill Tartarus and stop him from firing the ring. But what's this? As a failsafe, the entire Halo array has gone into standby mode, awaiting remote activation from a location known as the Ark. And it just so happens that's where Truth is heading. The game ends with Truth's ship exiting slip space near the Earth, with the iconic and immediate exchange between the Master Chief and Lord Hood.
No. Master Chief, you mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
To me, Halo 2's plot is a clear critique and commentary on organized religion and faith. The Arbiter is initially blinded and misled by the promise of the Great Journey, going so far as to ignore every attempt to illuminate him about the Prophet's lies. Only after his betrayal by Tartarus and the Prophets, and his first encounter with the Gravemind and the Master Chief, did he open his eyes to the truth. The Great Journey was a lie, and it would only lead to the extermination of all life in the galaxy. Arbiter's journey kind of reminds me of my own journey that led me to question my Catholic upbringing and abandon organized religion altogether. Except I'm not a space alien. Damn. That was a good video game. Halo 2 is epic. Okay, on to Halo 3. We gotta move this thing along, so let's go ahead and finish this fight. Halo 3 picks up right where Halo 2 left off. As Truth's ship enters Earth's atmosphere, the Chief bails and lands in the jungles of Tanzania, where the unconscious Spartan is discovered by Sergeant Johnson and the Arbiter. Unaware of the alliance that Johnson and the Arbiter forged between the humans and elites, the first thing Chief does when he comes to is run up to Arby and stick a pistol right in his mouth. But Arby just stares him down. He doesn't fear the Chief. He's too cool for that.
Were it so easy.
Holy shit, that's my boy. Arbiter is so fucking cool, you guys. Compared to the development of Combat Evolved in Halo 2, Halo 3 had a significantly more relaxed development cycle. Bungie was well aware of Halo 2's shortcomings and saw Halo 3 as an opportunity to make right by the fans who felt rubbed the other way by Halo 2. Halo 3's development wasn't without its hiccups though. Halo 2's development took such a huge toll at Bungie that some people didn't even know if they wanted to make video games anymore. Relationships and marriages were shattered by Halo 2's production. Lack of effective leadership in the early stages of Halo 3's development left the project without any real direction. Joe Staten, the game's writer, took an extended vacation after some conflicts with other members of the Bungie team, leading to a story drafted by committee that didn't really end up satisfying anybody. Remember, this was supposed to be the culmination of a trilogy. Everything was building up to this. They had to go big or go home. Marty was very critical about the story by committee approach. Basically, he was like, this story sucks. Nobody dies. Let's kill some people. What kind of anticlimax would it be to end your epic, sprawling sci-fi game trilogy without anybody dying? So Marty went around to people on the story team and he was like, hey, these people should die. And then we're all like, that's what I want to do, but nobody liked it. Marty was able to get the story team on the same page, and that's how we ended up getting the Halo 3 story we all know and love today. When Joe Staten came back, he was not a fan of some of the plot points that Marty and the guys came up with, but ultimately, I think it was for the best. I can't imagine Halo 3's plot any other way. There was also a lot of lingering dissatisfaction about Bungie's arrangement with Microsoft. Profit-sharing deal between Bungie and Microsoft was less than ideal. Bungie hitting their profit cap for Halo 2 on the first day of release. It ultimately ended up with a deal between Microsoft and Bungie being cut. After Bungie shipped a certain number of Halo games, Microsoft would let them go off on their own and become an independent company once again. However, the Halo IP would stay with Microsoft, and Microsoft would create a new company, 343 Industries, named after 343 Guilty Spark, to manage the intellectual property and to oversee the development of new Halo games after Bungie was done. But once those initial issues were dealt with, development was relatively smooth. No compromises were necessary for things like the campaign, and they were able to tell the story they wanted to without cutting out levels or having another cliffhanger ending. The additional development time also allowed Bungie to add features like the beloved Forge mode, which allowed players to make custom maps and game types. There were some issues in developing the multiplayer mode though. When Xbox Live moved to the 360, the new infrastructure that came along with it ended up breaking the systems that Bungie had hoped to build off of from Halo 2. So designer Max Hoberman had to spend a year of development just trying to get Halo 3's multiplayer back on par with Halo 2's content. When it comes to gameplay, Halo 3 refines the Halo formula even further. It doesn't change too much, the only real additions being equipment like the bubble shield, the power drainer, the gravity lift, and the ability to detach heavy weapons like machine guns and plasma turrets from their stands and walk around with them. It does add a whole host of new weapons and vehicles to create the most diverse Halo sandbox ever, and it still has not been topped. Weapons added include a whole host of new brute weapons like the Spiker, the Mauler, and the Gravity Hammer, along with the return of the Assault Rifle and the addition of the Spartan Laser. Weapons like the Brute Shot were buffed with increased magazine size, and unfortunately, they decided to nerf the Magnum again. This time it is even slower than the one in Halo 2. It is dreadful to use on multiplayer modes where you have one at the start of the match. It's not fun. Always, always, always. If you are in a multiplayer match, switch it for a battle rifle or a shotgun at the first opportunity that arises, or you are fucked. Not even dual wielding it with an SMG can save it, and that was the only way it was remotely viable in Halo 2. Thankfully, compared to Halo 2, Halo 3's plot is comparatively very narratively straightforward, so this plot synopsis hopefully shouldn't be as much of a pain in the ass to script. So let's jump into it. Chief, Arby, and Johnson cut their way through the jungles to rendezvous with Miranda Keyes and the rest of the UNSC at the Crow's Nest. Truth, who has now become mad with power, threatens that the Earth
will burn until its surface is but glass, and not even your demon will live to creep, blackened from its hole to mar the reflection of our passage.
Big talk for somebody who thought it was a good idea to betray the elites, the backbone of the Covenant military, and let them ally with the humans. Also, Truth's characterization is weird in this game. He's a lot more crazed and megalomaniacal than he was in Halo 2. In that game, he was more cool and collected. But now, he's hijacking human comm channels to worry about how he's gonna blast the Earth with his super laser blast! Also, he's voiced by Terrence Stamp now, and yeah, a change in voice actor is always a tad jarring, but I like Stamp's voice. Chief and Arby fight their way to the ruins of the Kenyan city of Voi, where Truth and the Covenant have been excavating the Ark. They take out the Covenant anti-air defenses set up around the excavation site, giving Ron Perlman the chance to fire on Truth's ship.
All ships, fire at will.
This is the way the world ends.
But big shocker, it does nothing, and Truth manages to activate the Forerunner structure anyway. But plot twist, that wasn't the Ark, but a portal to the Ark. But the boys can't trace Truth quite yet, cause oh fuck, the Flood has arrived on Earth. In the bowels of the Flood Hive, get it? They base the aesthetic of this level off of a colonoscopy. Chief finds the message recorded by Cortana, telling him that the only way to stop Truth from the Gravemind is through the portal. Also, Guilty Spark is there too. How did he get here? It doesn't matter. He's coming with us now. While initially hesitant, Ron Perlman lets the boys jump through the portal and take the fight to the Ark. And yes, for the sake of this, Miranda is one of the boys now. This real Ark is beyond the edge of the Milky Way galaxy, far enough to protect anything on it from the activation of the Halo array. With the help of Spark, Chief, Arby, and Johnson are able to find the location of the Citadel, the place from where Truth can remotely activate the rings. So the UNSC and the Covenant throw everything they got at each other for one final epic battle for the fate of all life in the galaxy. This is the level simply titled The Covenant. It is one of the best levels in the entire series. It begins with a beach battle reminiscent of the Silent Cartographer from Combat Evolved, with Chief and the boys making a push up towards a tower generating a shield that is the one thing standing between them and Truth. There are big epic vehicle sections galore on the stage. You get to use Warthogs, Scorpion tanks, and the Hornet. It is incredible. After you take down the towers generating the shield, you mount up and break through Covenant lines and battle with the last two Scarabs guarding the Citadel door, marking the last stand of the Covenant. By the time you make it to the Citadel, Truth and his brute honor guards are engaged with Johnson and Keyes. But because Truth is not a reclaimer, he can't activate the rings himself. He needs to force one of them to start the process for him. Without any good options left, Keyes, in an act of desperation, draws her pistol and turns it on Johnson, intending to kill him and then herself in order to buy enough time for Chief and Arby to finish the job. But she hesitates, and Truth is able to get a couple shots on her with his spiker, killing her and forcing Johnson to activate Halo. But conveniently enough for our heroes, the Gravemind and High Charity arrive at the Ark in order to stop Truth. The Gravemind, always the pragmatist, decides it is in the best interest of the Flood to ally with the Master Chief and the Arbiter, even for just a brief moment, because Truth firing the rings would be the end of all life, human and Flood alike, and because Master Chief is a human, a reclaimer, only he is able to stop the activation of the array now. When I first played this section, my mind was fucking blown. You get to fight with the Flood? I wasn't expecting that. The Flood attack by swarming you with overwhelming numbers, and now that you're fighting side by side, you get to feel what it's like to be part of the Flood onslaught yourself. With the Flood's help, our heroes are able to make it to Truth, already beginning to succumb to Flood infection himself. And while Chief steps in to stop the firing process, Arbiter grabs Truth and kills him once and for all.
I am Truth, the voice of the Covenant.
So, you must be silenced.
And with that, the war was won. The Covenant is over. But the battle is not yet finished, for now that the threat of Halo is gone, Master Chief and Arbiter have outlived their usefulness for the Gravemind, and he turns on them. Master Chief decides to venture alone into the flood-infected remains of High Charity and rescue Cortana, fulfilling the promise he made to her in Halo 2 that he would be back for her after Truth was done. The two have a touching reunion and make their escape from High Charity. They discover that the Ark was constructing a replacement for the Halo ring that was destroyed by the Master Chief in the first game, and it's almost ready. Knowing that this is their chance to finally finish the flood once and for all, Chief, Arbiter, Spark, and Johnson set out for the ring with the intent to light it. But as they make their way to the control room, the Gravemind, knowing its time is about up, makes a last-ditch effort to stop our heroes, throwing everything the Flood has at them, but ultimately to no avail. The gang all make it to the control room, all ready to fire the ring, but Spark is not having any of it. As the ring is not finished being built, activating it would destroy it, and he gets pissed. Out of anger, he attacks Johnson and then turns his fire at Chief and the Arbiter, so the Chief takes up Johnson's Spartan laser, blasts the shit out of Spark till the little bastard blows up and dies.
Ever let her go. Send me out with a bang.
Johnson, no! You were my favorite character! Damn you, Marty, this was all your idea! Now, all our heroes gotta do is escape before the pulse of the Halo turns them into something resembling a fine powder. What follows is one of the best moments in the history of gaming, the final Warthog run. And I thought Halo 1's final escape sequence was cool, but it hasn't got anything on Halo 3's. The boys commandeer Johnson's Warthog, and using it, they traverse the scaffolding of the unfinished Halo, the firing sequence shaking the ring apart as they drive through it. All the while, the Gravemind and their Flood make one final attempt to take the heroes out with them. This is fucking awesome. And as you drive through, there are explosions going everywhere, like, and the music is all like, da 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 da! What a way to cap off one of the greatest trilogies in the history of gaming. Chief and Arbiter just barely make it to the UNSC forward onto Dawn in time to escape Halo's fire, but the activation of Halo causes the slipspace portal they were going to escape through collapse while they were inside, tearing the ship in half. Ultimately, only the front half of the Dawn, carrying the Arbiter, makes it safely back to Earth, while the back half, carrying Chief and Cortana, is left drifting in space in the distant reaches of the Milky Way. On Earth, a memorial service is held for the fallen heroes of the Human Covenant War. Johnson, Keyes, and all the others who laid down everything in humanity's fight for survival. As he didn't return safely back to Earth, the Master Chief is presumed dead, having not survived the journey home, but Arbiter, a sworn enemy turned friend, having fought alongside the Chief till the bitter end, and having seen what he is truly capable of, still believes John is out there somewhere. The Arbiter and Lord Hood shake hands one last time, marking the formal end of the Human Covenant War. A decades-long war of attrition finally coming to a close, the galaxy can finally be at peace once again. Meanwhile, aboard the Dawn, the Master Chief puts himself in cryosleep, awaiting the day when he and Cortana are rescued and the galaxy needs them once again. The fight may be finished, but the Master Chief's story is not. Halo 3 is one of the greatest video games ever made. It brings over the highly engaging and satisfying gameplay from the first two games and refines it further. Its campaign, while shorter than Halo 2, trims most of the fat and delivers a thrilling experience with excellent story and pacing, with the exception of the second to last level, Cortana. It's like the library all over again. Everything looks the same, there are so many fucking enemies everywhere, and it doesn't help that they blend into the background. It sucks. When I played through it, I marathoned it in like 2 days. It was incredible, and I wanted to see how everything ended. The story does a fantastic job wrapping up all the loose ends from the previous games in a nice little bow. By the time the credits rolled, I was satisfied with the way things ended. Combine this excellent campaign with the highly addictive online multiplayer mode that is both accessible enough for new players to dip their toes into and deep enough to really sink your teeth into, and the excellent extra that is the Forge mode. Halo 3 is an incredible package and a masterpiece in every sense of the word. I love it.
You know the music. Time to dance.
After shipping Halo 3, Bungie still had 2 more Halo projects left to make for Microsoft before they would be allowed to go off on their own as an independent studio game. These games would become the side story Halo 3 ODST and the prequel story Halo Reach. Initially conceived as a small side project to bridge the gap between the releases of Halo 3 and Reach, it ultimately ended up evolving into a full retail release. In effect, ODST is basically a standalone extension for Halo 3. Halo 3 ODST is pretty neat. It takes place concurrently with Halo 2, set in the Covenant-occupied ruins of New Mombasa after Master Chief goes into space in pursuit of regret. In this game, instead of playing as the Chief or another Spartan, you get to play as the squad of ODSTs codenamed Alpha 9, We get separated from one another after the shockwave from Regret's sloop space jump from Halo 2 destroys the city. The game's story revolves around the Rookie, who wanders through the streets of New Mombasa in search of his crewmates. ODST experiments with a pseudo-open world, Mombasa streets acting as a sort of hub world where you're free to roam and tackle the campaign missions in any order you would like. In the streets of Mombasa, the Rookie finds evidence of what happened to his teammates, be it a bent sniper rifle or a used can of biofilm, which in turn lead to the actual campaign missions. The campaign missions are flashback sequences that take place earlier in the day, putting you in the shoes of the other ODST members of Alpha 9, Buck, Mickey, Romeo, and Dutch. While I don't really like the segments of gameplay in Mombasa streets, the campaign missions are incredible. The highlights for me are the stages Uplift Reserve, where you play as Dutch leading a warthog charge through a Covenant-occupied zoo, and Kikowani Station, where Buck has to defend a hijacked Phantom against Covenant anti-air forces. It's awesome. Because you're not a Spartan, you don't have the strengths and abilities the Master Chief does. As an ODST, you're pretty much just a regular human soldier, and that completely changes the way you approach the combat situations. You don't have the luxury of the Chief's regenerating energy shields. If you try to rush in and fuck people up like you would in Halo's TE 2 and 3, you'd find yourself dead really quickly, so you gotta do things a little more slowly and meticulously if you wanted to prevail. The best part about ODST is the dialogue. Despite the absolute desperation of the situation, Bungie found a way to make the game hilarious without compromising on tone. The banter between the ODSTs is absolutely golden, and it made me burst out laughing many times, much to the annoyance of my roommates who were just trying to do their homework.
Thanks for picking such a tall building. I'm really digging all these stairs.
Do you ever get tired of bitching, Romeo?
You ever get tired of busting my balls?
Point taken.
Keep me covered. And try to keep up.
Take my advice, Rookie. You ever fall for a woman? Make sure she's got balls.
Also, Nathan Fillion is in this game. Captain Hammer himself. That is awesome. I love him. He's funny. You can't talk about ODST without commenting on the soundtrack. When working on ODST, Marty opts for a quieter, more somber approach to some of the tracks, heavy on piano and saxophone. These pieces are absolutely gorgeous, and unlike anything we've heard before in the Halo series, then it really sets the mood. ODST's big addition to the series was the introduction of the Firefight mode, a cooperative horde mode where you and your bros have to survive for as long as you can against waves of increasingly difficult enemies. It's cool. Unfortunately, I have nobody who wants to play ODST Firefight with me, so I don't have much to say about that. My biggest complaint with ODST is its short campaign length and relative lack of content. The campaign is only about 8 levels long, and they are short levels. Some of these campaign missions have a par time as low as 3 minutes compared to the 15 to 25 minutes in the other games. I was able to beat the campaign in maybe 3.5 to 4 hours. While its short length isn't much of a big deal nowadays, with it being only one of 6 games in the $40 Master Chief Collection, when it launched, it was a point of controversy whether or not ODST had enough content to justify its full $60 price tag. It didn't even have a PvP mode, which is where players would get the majority of their playtime after finishing the campaign. Instead, it came packaged with Halo 3's online PvP on a separate disc. However, Halo 3 ODST to me is still a fun time, and it's worth checking out if you have the Master Chief Collection. It's a short but sweet adventure with an incredible atmosphere and even better characters. And finally, we have made it to Bungie's final Halo project, Halo Reach. Released in 2010, Halo Reach is a prequel tale, taking place in the final days of the human colony planet Reach. All throughout the series, the characters allude to what happened on the planet Reach, how it was destroyed by the Covenant, but now you actually get to see the fall of Reach firsthand. Instead of John 117, you step into the shoes of a different Spartan, Spartan B312. Better known by their call sign, Noble 6. Noble 6 is the newest member of Noble Team, an elite Spartan unit that was deployed to discover the source of a communications blackout near the city of Visegrad in the Reach countryside. Along with the player, Noble Team consists of Spartans Carter, Noble 1, Kat, Noble 2, June, Noble 3, Emil, Noble 4, and George, Noble 5. While originally under the belief that the blackout was caused by human rebels on the planet, it was instead discovered that the Covenant was on Reach. Reach was one of Earth's most important colonies and the last thing standing between the Covenant and humanity's homeworld. Reach depicts the absolute cost and horror of war better than any of the other games in the series. Sure, in Halo CE 2 and 3, you get the sense of the destruction that the Covenant has wrought upon Earth and its colonies. But in Reach, you get to see it more intimately than you ever have before. The Covenant is just too powerful. And even though Noble tries as best as they can to stop them, in the end, the fight is hopeless. One by one, you have to watch as your squad mates are killed off until you are all that's left, and then it's your turn to die. You're forced to have a front row seat to the Covenant's atrocities, like shooting down a civilian evacuation craft with 600 people aboard, children and families among them. And even though you are a towering hulk of a soldier in power armor, you're helpless to do anything about it. And even though this game takes place on a distant planet 500 years into the future, places you fight in feel really familiar. You have to fight off the Covenant in office buildings and shopping malls, in hospitals and in nightclubs. You have to watch as giant Covenant crafts blast entire cities with plasma from orbit until there's nothing left but molten glass. Eventually, Noble 6 is given a mission to deliver a package containing a fragment of Cortana to the Pillar of Autumn to be evacuated from Reach before the planet is destroyed. Cortana contained information that would, in the right hands, ultimately lead to humanity's triumph over the Covenant against all odds. Once she is delivered to the Autumn, though, Noble 6 refuses an opportunity to escape the planet, instead staying behind on Reach and covering the Autumn's takeoff, ultimately sacrificing life itself in order to ensure humanity's eventual salvation and victory. Their mission complete and stranded on a dying planet, Noble 6 makes their last stand against the Covenant, fighting valiantly until they are overwhelmed and killed by elites. The game ends on a shot of Noble 6's helmet, its visor cracked and laying on the ground where they died, as the Covenant finished their blasting of Reach, turning what was once an Earth-like planet into a desolate, dead husk of the world it once was. Only because of Noble 6's bravery and sacrifice was the Master Chief able to find Halo and turn the tide of the war and deliver humanity from almost certain extinction. For even though Reach was glassed and Noble 6 killed, the Covenant wasn't fast enough, and they had already passed the torch. Halo Reach's campaign is absolutely incredible, but my enjoyment of it was hampered by what I feel like were steps back in the gameplay department. Dual wielding was removed, never to return, and I'm really not a fan of Halo Reach's weapons sandbox. They did give the Magnum a scope again though, which is epic, but they also added Bloom to Halo, which is a fucking bullshit mechanic that I hate. Reach also added a new feature, armor abilities, which allow you to do things like sprint, use a jetpack, lock down your armor for temporary invincibility while you let your shield recharge, or active camo. In the campaign, I quite like the way that the armor abilities are integrated in the campaign. In multiplayer, it means no more even starts, and the armor lock in multiplayer is some big time bullshit. I love how, at the press of a button, an enemy gamer can just completely grind the pace of a firefight to a halt. It can completely break the pacing on multiplayer matches, and it's just fucking obnoxious. However, if everybody agrees not to use armor lock, Reach's multiplayer is a fun time. When composing Reach's soundtrack, Marty took on a different approach than what he did with the other games he worked on. He wanted to create a grittier and more somber sound than the previous game, and I think the result is one of the most unique and varied Halo soundtracks out there. It's got big bombastic pieces like a Noble Mission that work to exemplify the heroism of Noble Team at the scale of the war. Lone Wolf makes you feel like a badass with them harassing collection in the car. And somber tracks like Reflection that capture the absolute hopelessness of Reach's defense. That is the best part about Reach. Its ability to make you feel despair when the Master Chief games would make you feel like a badass. Yes, you are still a genetically augmented super soldier in power armor, but even still, there's only so much you can do when the odds are this stacked against you. and it wouldn't be quite as impactful without Marty's beautiful music backing it up. Halo Reach is an incredible game.
Wake up, Chief. I need you.
Now that Bungie was done with Microsoft and Halo and off to pursue their own endeavors as an independent studio like Destiny, that left 343 Industries in charge of making a true follow-up to Halo 3, continuing the story of Master Chief and Cortana. Since 2007, 343 has managed the Halo IP, overseeing projects like the Halo Legends anime and developing some DLC maps for Halo Reach. But this is the first time they had the responsibility of making an entirely new Halo experience. Given Bungie's reputation and the reception of all their Halo games, each one being lauded as one of the greatest games of all time in their own rights, 343 had some very, very big shoes to fill. So were they able to create a game that lives up to the legendary legacy of its predecessors? Not quite. Halo 4 is a controversial entry in the Halo series for a good reason. It made a lot of changes to the formula that a bunch of people didn't like. It wasn't as universally hated as Halo 5, fuck Halo 5, and some people have begun to warm up to it in recent years, but it isn't at all my favorite. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate Halo 4 by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's a competently made game, but does that make it deserve to be the highest rated Halo installment on IGN? No fucking way. 343 out Bungie's Bungie. Halo 4 is a triumph. I'm sorry, who wrote this? I have some issues with Halo 4, more so than any of the Bungie games. It doesn't have the same magic the previous Halos had. Its aesthetic and design make it feel entirely different. It doesn't feel like Halo. Sure, it has all the trappings of a Halo game, Master Chief, Cortana, evil aliens, but it just isn't the same. I also feel like the weapons sandbox is a bit hit and miss. You have mainstays like the assault rifle, battle rifle, shotgun, carbine, and energy sword returning, but they don't feel the same. Energy weapons fucking suck in this game. Each shot uses way more battery than it needs to. The storm rifle, plasma pistol, and plasma rifle are fucking useless in Halo 4 because of how few shots you can get out of them. The only remotely useful energy weapons are the Spartan laser and energy sword, but even they got fucked in the transition from 3 to 4. The Forerunner weapons like the suppressor, light rifle, and scatter shot just feel like regular UNSC assault rifle, battle rifle, and shotgun, with a slight twist to justify the time the developers spent modeling them. However, in several levels, the Forerunner weapons are your only viable options because they're the only ones that you can find ammo for in abundance. It's a persistent problem in Halo 4. It never really feels like I have enough ammo. It feels like in every level there's at least 1 or 2 combat encounters that leave me with no choice but to scavenge for weapons while being shot at from every direction. I don't remember that happening in any of the other games. I feel like that's just poor design. 343 did make one incredible addition to the sandbox, however. The Mantis. The Mantis is one of the coolest vehicles in the entire Halo series. It has a big ass neck. It is fucking awesome. One incredibly controversial gameplay change that is still hotly debated in the Halo community over whether or not it was a good addition or not was sprinting. No longer an armor ability, you can just hold a button and Chief will start booking it. I, for one, actually like the sprint. It makes combat more fun and faster paced. It makes sense in the Halo canon too. Apparently with his full set of armor on, John 117 can run at over 60 miles per hour. What the fuck? How is this man so fast? That's faster than the speed limit on most interstate highways, and that armor weighs like 1,000 pounds. The multiplayer is also not the best. There's a reason why the online scene for this game died out faster than any of the other Halos. The new loadout system eliminates even starts, and eventually everybody does realize if you use the bolt shot and a precision weapon like the battle rifle and the DMR, you just win. So everybody just started using that, and it was not fun. But there were a lot of aspects of Halo 4 I did in fact enjoy. For the most part, I thought the story was pretty good. Halo 4 begins with Cortana awakening Master Chief after 4.5 years adrift in space because the Covenant splinter faction has boarded the Forward into Dawn. The Dawn has drifted into the vicinity of an ancient Forerunner shield world named Requiem, and the Chief and Cortana are pulled in by its overwhelming artificial gravity. While on the surface of Requiem, Chief and Cortana try to make contact with the ship UNSC Infinity for rescue, fighting their way through new Forerunner construct enemies. But when Master Chief activates what he thinks is a communications relay to warn Infinity about the dangers posed by Requiem's gravity well, he accidentally releases a vengeful Forerunner named Didact from his imprisonment in his cryptum deep within the planet. The Didact is still pissed that the Forerunners passed the mantle of responsibility to humanity, and believes that only Forerunners should rule the galaxy, so he wants to use an ancient weapon called the Composer to digitize all of humanity and enslave them. That's one thing I don't understand about this story. What exactly is the purpose of the Composer, and why does the Didact need it? Also, the Covenant Splinter faction from earlier, yeah, they worship and serve the Didact. Eventually, the Master Chief comes across the Didact's nemesis, a Forerunner known as the Librarian, and she accelerates Master Chief's evolution somehow to give him plot armor against the Composer's effects. When the Master Chief and Cortana try to inform Infinity's captain, Andrew Del Rio, about the dangers the Didact poses to Earth and humanity, he does not believe them, not trusting
the hallucinations of an aging Spartan and his malfunctioning AI.
Also, Cortana's been malfunctioning. That was a big part of the story. I guess I should have mentioned that. But as they are about to leave Requiem, Cortana gets angry, and she messes something up. I don't know what, but something ain't right. Knowing that Cortana's outburst is a product of her nearing the end of her service life and degrading, Del Rio orders his first officer, Thomas Lasky, to remove her and prepare her for her final dispensation. But my boy Johnny 117 over here, he steps in and takes Cortana himself before Lasky can do that, and Del Rio is not happy any of that.
Give me that chip.
The Didact has to be stopped. If you won't do that, I will.
I am ordering you to surrender that AI!
No, sir.
Lieutenant! Arrest that man!
Captain!
Arrest him!
Captain!
I don't know if you already can tell this, but Master Chief takes shit from nobody. And of course, nobody's willing to arrest the Master Chief and take him into custody because, you know, he's the Master Chief. So Del Rio ultimately ends up abandoning the Spartan on Requiem. But not before Lasky, against his commanding officer's orders, gives Chief a combat-fitted Pelican to aid him in his pursuit of the Didact. Lasky's a bro. I like Lasky. I feel like Andrew Del Rio only exists in this game to give somebody that the Master Chief can defy orders from. And of course, in the end, it is Del Rio who gets court-martialed and relieved his command. You don't talk to the savior of humanity like that, son. Know your place. The Chief commandeers a Phantom and ends up at the research base, Ivanov Station. Much to the chagrin of Sandy Tilson, the lead scientist on the station, Chief tells her that he needs a nuclear bomb to destroy the Composer before the Didact can get to it. But it's too late. The Didact finds the Composer and uses it to compose all of the scientists aboard the station. I'm not going to lie, this scene freaked me out when I first saw it. Tilson's death was somewhat horrifying. We typically don't see stuff like that in Halo. But thanks to the convenient plot armor that the Librarian gave the Chief early in the game, he is the sole survivor, so he and Cortana pursued the Didact in a nuclear-armed space fighter to destroy the Composer before he can use it on the Earth, which is where he's headed. The Didact ends up reaching Earth and ends up turning the Composer on Phoenix, Arizona, wiping out its entire population. John and the Didact face off against one another for the last time, with our hero getting the upper hand, planting a grenade in the Didact's chest and then activating the nuclear weapon he carried in on its back. Using the last of her strength, Cortana is able to spare John from the blast of the nuke and manifest herself in a physical form to have one final emotional moment where she is finally able to physically touch John, something she has always wanted to do. Cortana says goodbye to John one last time and she dies. Chief is later recovered by the UNSC Infinity and shares an emotional moment with Lasky over Cortana's death. My favorite part about this story is how 343 went and tried to humanize the Master Chief as a character and focus more on the relationship between John and his AI companion. John talks a lot more in Halo 4 than any of the other games. Sure, while the Chief was a man of few words, he was never entirely silent, throwing out a few badass one-liners every now and then. But I do not think this changes the detriment at all to our ability to relate to the Master Chief. I think it makes him a more compelling character because he's capable of feeling emotions that we can relate to. And all throughout the war, Cortana has been Chief's anchor to his humanity. She may be only an AI, but she too is a person with hopes, dreams, and desires. Over the course of their service together, Chief and Cortana come to deeply care about one another. And when she dies, it devastates the Chief, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. Master Chief may be a battle-hardened veteran of over 30 years, being kidnapped to serve in the Spartan program at only age 6. But at the end of the day, under all that armor, he's human too, and grief and loss are very human experiences. I think this final interaction between Lasky and Chief sums it up best. Halo 4 is an alright game. While it does take several steps back, I do appreciate some of the changes it made. And that concludes the Halo series thus far. There were no other games. Nope, not at all. Just straight from 4 to Infinite. Halo 5 sucks dick, that's all I have to say about that game. This video took a lot longer to make than I was expecting. I started work on it all the way back in August, and I originally intended it to have it out just in time for Halo Infinite's launch. As you can clearly see, that didn't end up happening. It didn't help that 343 decided to release Halo Infinite's online multiplayer early to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Halo and Xbox, and that basically took over all my free time for a solid couple of weeks there in November. I had put 65 hours into the game even before it officially launched. And somehow, despite that, I managed not to completely start tanking in all my classes. I don't know how I managed that. My life basically became wake up, play Halo, go to class, play Halo, eat, play Halo, poop, homework, play Halo, sleep, repeat. Even my dreams were about Halo. And now, Halo Infinite's Master Chief campaign is out, and I feel that it only makes sense to briefly discuss my first impressions of the game to round off the video. And don't worry, there are no spoilers here. Holy shit. This game is amazing. 343, you did it! You finally did it! You guys made a Halo game that lives up to the legacy of Bungie's Halo titles. Halo Infinite recaptures the magic of the old Halo games while at the same time innovating and taking the series in a new direction. It's got a nice balance between traditional style missions and more linear and confined areas like the Forerunner dungeons, and missions that let you explore the vast open world of Zeta Halo. I know in the past I've criticized the trend of every game needing to have an open world just because Zelda and Witcher and Skyrim did it and they were great and successful games, but I think Halo nails it. And it's so much fun swinging around with the grapple shot and fighting hordes of banished in the wilderness. And aside from the main objective, Zeta Halo has a lot of things to offer. Maybe there's a banished facility you need to raid, a squad of Marines that need your help, or an armor locker hidden somewhere that contains a cosmetic you can use for your Spartan in multiplayer. Also, the multiplayer is a hell of a lot of fun. Sure, the battle pass and cosmetic systems are kind of stinky poo-poo right now, and the game needs more playlists and game modes, but those are all things 343 has plans to fix. Fiesta, free-for-all, and SWAT game types are already in the game, and you can play them in custom games if you disconnect from the internet. And there's already plans to add those playlists in a Slayer playlist in the coming weeks. Dude, Halo Infinite is just so good. Play it. Get the campaign. And if you don't want to drop 60 bones on it, it's right there on Game Pass. Just play it. I love Halo. It's one of my favorite game franchises of all time. In the short time I've been playing it, it has entirely won me over. The Bungie games are all-time classics that I find infinitely replayable. And while 343 has made some missteps with the franchise since they've taken the reins, Halo Infinite is a breath of fresh air for the series. It finally feels like 343 has figured out how to recapture what made people love Halo in the first place. I think Halo Infinite is a sign that the series has a very bright future ahead of it, and I'm excited. But I think I've talked for way too long. Honestly, I could talk about these games for hours upon hours, analyzing every minute aspect that makes them so great. But I actually want this video to be finished before I die of old age, so I think I will wrap it up here. And if you're still watching, thanks for sticking around to the very end. And until next time, guys, I hope to see you on the battlefield. Bye-bye.